Well, you don't have to be much of a sports fan to know that in the last 10 years, there's been this steroid scandal among a lot of the different sports. I mean, you look at baseball, and you got Alex Rodriguez. You've got one of the greatest pitchers of all times, Roger Clemens. You got Barry Bonds. I mean, the list could go on of these players that were using steroids, trying to get a little extra strength. You go into one of my favorite sports of cycling. You got Lance Armstrong, Floyd Landis. I mean, and the list is huge there of these people who were caught, who were implicated, who were, said they were using these different performance-enhancing drugs. All looking for a little extra strength. I mean, maybe it was just a time in their life, their career started to go downhill a little bit, happens with age. Maybe it was trying to recover from an injury, just looking for that little extra power, that little extra strength to help get them through. So they use these performance-enhancing drugs. Sometimes we need a little strength too, don't we? I mean, we do. We want that little extra strength to get us through, and there are pretty, plenty of over-the-counter supplements that we can go. I mean, I just made a run to Speedway this morning, and, you can go with one of my favorites, Monster Java. Love this stuff right there. That'll get you through. You can do the 5-hour energy, extra strength. If it's still 5-hour, but it's extra strength, what does it do? Is it 5 hours and 1 minute? I mean, I don't know. So 5-hour extra strength. Mountain Dew Kickstart Hydrating Boost. I mean, maybe that'll help get you through. I don't know. Red Bull gives you wings. Who doesn't need wings occasionally, right? I mean, everybody needs wings sometimes. So we have these things. I don't know if you saw the commercial. It was probably several years old now. It was a commercial, and all these people in this commercial, they're like all falling asleep. It's this crowd, and they're all falling asleep. I thought I'd see some of you in the commercial. I was like, 5th row, 9:30 service right there. I mean, it's kind of what it looked like. But it was a commercial for Pepsi Max. And, they just said Pepsi Max gives you the energy you need to get through. I mean, it wakes you up. It helps you out. So I've been thinking that when we do communion before the sermon, we'll start putting this in the communion cups. Just that little extra boost to get you guys through. I think sometimes there are some of you need it. All right, you need it because it looks like you're not getting through. We turn to drugs. We turn to drinks. We turn to supplements, herbal supplements, But listen, we know this. We know this, that there are times in our lives when we're going through some challenging moments in life that what we can buy at Speedway, what we can get at Walmart, even what the doctor prescribes is not enough to give us the strength that we need. Yeah, I mean, the doctor can give us some medications that help us to not crumble during these challenging times in our lives. I mean, I wish there was something. I wish we could go to the store and we could buy a drink and we drink this drink and then all of a sudden, we just, we have what it takes to face life's challenges. We have hope, we have peace. I wish we could pop a pill and then all of a sudden we got the strength to go next door and begin to talk to our neighbor about a relationship with Christ and invite them to church and to give more generously. I wish we could, take some kind of pill that would produce in us the fruits of the Spirit and then all of a sudden we got patience and kindness and goodness, gentleness, self-control. We got love, That would be great, but there is no pill, there is no soda, there is no supplement, there is no drug. So where do we find the strength for life's greatest challenges? Well, if you haven't turned there yet, turn to your Bibles in John chapter 15. John chapter 15 this morning. We are in a series that we started last week on Easter Sunday called I Am. And we are looking at these statements where Jesus says, I am. They're found in the Gospel of John, and he says, I am this, or I am this, or I am this. And each of these statements tells us about a character about him. It also helps us to relate to him. And each of these statements also answers a vitally important question. A question that all of us at some point in our life will probably ask. And the question we're going to address this week is, who's going to give me strength? Who's going to give me strength? And Jesus is going to answer, I am. Because I am the vine and you are the branches. Now, to really understand this teaching, you have to put yourself in the context to know what's happening in the life of Jesus. Okay, at this moment in John chapter 15, here's what's going on. Here's what's happening. Jesus doesn't have much time left. He's about to leave this earth. So when we catch him, he's with his disciples. He's got like just hours left, really, just hours. And it's in these moments, when it's your last hours, where words become very important. And people tend to say some very important things in their last hours to the people they love. I mean, I'm in a ministry for over 20 years now, and I've been at the deathbed of a lot of people, and this is the moment. This is the moment where they say things. This is the moment where the son hears from his father the words he's longed to hear. You know, son, I'm proud of you. This is when, a mom looks at her children and says, I just wish you would get back in the church. That would make me so happy to know you were getting back in the church. Or a husband looks at his wife and says, I'm sorry I wasn't there as much as I should have been for you. I'm sorry I didn't give as much time to you as I should have. But it's in these moments that words are chosen carefully. It's in these moments that these are the words that will be remembered forever. And this is one of those moments. Jesus knows that. He knows he doesn't have much time left on earth with his disciples. He knows the kind of challenges they are going to face. Just earlier in John chapter 14, they're in the upper room. This is where Jesus washes the disciples' feet, and they have communion together, the Last Supper together. And he talks to them about being a servant to all people. But he also says to the disciples in John 14, he said this. He said, in just a little while, the world will no longer see me. The world will no longer see me. And so maybe he sees the concern in their face. Maybe he sees the anxiety in their eyes. You know, what does Jesus mean by this? He knows he's not going to leave them alone. He's not going to leave them as orphans. Yes, he's leaving, but he's not going to leave them alone. And so they leave the upper room in silence. The disciples are anxious. They're worried. What does all this mean? And Jesus is just thinking of them. But he's also thinking of us. He's thinking of us. He knows the challenges that they will face. He knows the challenges that we're going to face. And so let's look at three different areas where we're going to face challenges, where we're going to need strength. So area number one, where we're going to need strength, is we're going to need help to get us through what we can't get through on our own. We need help to get through what we can't get through on our own, right? I mean, that makes sense. I mean, there are just some things that you never thought would happen to you. And you wonder, where am I going to get the strength? I mean, the disciples are going to experience that. I mean, it's not just going to be for the next couple of days. It's going to be like for a while for them, like for years for them, where it's going to be difficult for them, where they're going to be persecuted and they're going to be pressured because they were followers of Jesus. Eventually, tradition tells us that every one of the disciples, except for John, who was sent to an island, every one of the disciples died for their faith. So they are going to need strength to endure this suffering that they never imagined would happen to them. And maybe that's where you are right now. Maybe that's what you're going through. I mean, maybe you're experiencing something. You never thought this would happen to me. I mean, yeah, I've seen other people, but not me. And now it's your story. And I mean, I hear these stories every week. Another pregnancy test comes back negative. Another month without a job. Another night where you don't know your children are sleeping. These are the stories. A child is diagnosed. A house is foreclosed on. A spouse is unfaithful. A job is lost. And you're wondering, where am I going to get the strength for this? I mean, I can't do it on my own. And if not now, probably at some point in your life it will happen. Where you're going to go, I don't know what to do. I don't know where to get the strength. I don't know where to turn. Where do you go for strength in those times? Area number two, to help us not do what we know we shouldn't do. to help us not do what we know we shouldn't do, right? I mean, we're constantly faced with temptations. Every day we are faced with temptations. Our heart is right. We want to do the right thing, but sometimes we find ourselves failing and falling and just continuing to do the wrong things. We're just not strong enough. I mean, most people I talk to about this, it's not like they want to do, things that God doesn't want them to do. They just find themselves doing it. I mean, it's not like they want to be the person who cheats, the person who lies, the person who orders that movie. They don't want to be that person. That's not who they want to be. But they don't know where to get the strength to not do what they know they shouldn't do. Area 3. It's the opposite of 2. To help us do what we know we should do. To help us do what we know we should do. We know what we want to look like. I mean, we have this picture. This is the type of person I want to be. This is the characteristics I want to have in my life. But where do we find the strength? I mean, we want to be good. And so we're sitting here and we're thinking, okay, this is it. This is it. I'm going to be more generous with those in need. Well, what happens? I'm going to be more patient with my children. I'm going to be more gracious with my spouse. But we don't have the strength. I mean, where do we find the strength to do the things that we know we should do? So Jesus is with his disciples. They're wondering where they're going to get the strength that they need. They walk out of the upper room in the cool of the night. They're following Jesus. They don't know it, but he's leading them to the Garden of Gethsemane. And he knows what he's about to face. He knows he's going to be betrayed, he's going to be arrested, he's going to be beaten, and then he's going to be crucified. He's winding them along these paths through the garden, through these ancient vineyards that have been there a while. And he's thinking, I don't have much time left. What is the one thing I want to say to my disciples? So he stops, he breaks the silence. He gestures towards a vine on the side of the road, and if you look at verse 1, this is what he says. I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. So what he's going to tell his disciples in the last moments, and what he's going to tell us is, you need to understand your relationship. I am the vine, and he's going to tell them, you are the branches. We are the branches. That for us to have the strength, we have to be connected to the vine. You try not to be connected to the vine, you are not going to have the strength, you are not going to have the power that you need. The one message that he wants to make clear to his disciples in the time he has left is this: stay connected. Stay connected. All right? Because the strength comes from the vine. It's not the branch, it's in the vine. So how do we find strength? Let's look at 3 steps. 3 steps to find strength. Step number 1 is this: acknowledge your own weaknesses. Acknowledge your own weaknesses. So if you're going to find strength, here's the first thing we need to do. Acknowledge our own weaknesses. Acknowledge that we are the branch. All right? We're not the vine. Acknowledge your own weaknesses. I was reading not too long ago about interviewing, job interviews, and it wasn't surprising to me. The most dreaded question in any job interview is what? What are your weaknesses? And I mean, every interview I think I've ever gone through, they ask that question. What are your weaknesses? So when I was coming out of college, you want to say the right things, but when they ask you your weakness, I mean, you're kind of in trouble, right? Because I mean, either way you go, you could get yourself in trouble. You don't want to sit there and not answer when they say, what are your greatest weaknesses? You don't want to have an answer, because then you're just arrogant, right? Like, I have no weaknesses. Look at me. Dude, I'm strong. Or you don't want to actually tell them your greatest weakness, because then you're not going to get the job, all right? So you don't want to tell them. So when I was coming out of college, my professor, he said when I was going to my first professional interview, he said, disguise your weakness as a strength. Disguise your weakness as a strength. I was like, so what do you mean? He's like, well, he say something like this. Well, I tend to be a bit of a perfectionist, and so, I can be pretty hard on myself. So being pretty hard on yourself is your weakness. I mean, sounds like a strength when you're going to work. So, I'll tell you what my greatest weakness is, I tend to work a little hard at my job, and so sometimes my life gets a little out of balance. So I tend to work hard is my greatest weakness. It Sounds more like a strength, right? Or, sometimes they'll ask you this question. Tell us your greatest weakness and how you've overcome that weakness. So basically, okay, again, I'm going to turn my weakness into a strength. And so you say something like, well, I tend to be a very task-oriented person, so I've learned that I need to delegate to other people and work together as a team. It's a team effort. Sounds good, right? Sounds really good. Anything but being honest. Because we don't want to tell them what our greatest weakness is. My favorite is when they tell you something like this. They say, well, tell them the weakness that has nothing to do with the job you're applying for. So, you're applying to be an accountant, all right? And they say, what is your greatest weakness? Well, you don't want to look at them and go, I'm not good with numbers. Because you're probably not going to get the job, all right? Accountants tend to have to be good with numbers. So, they say, well, what is your greatest weakness? You say something like, I don't know, something off the wall. I tend to be very injury prone when I play basketball. Or I don't wear the color green well. Just something that has nothing to do with the job. Anything but tell them what your greatest weakness is. You just something irrelevant. We don't want to admit we're weak. And that's kind of the mentality that we have in life. We just put on this perception, this persona that I'm strong. And here's what we tend to do. We tend to bring that into church sometimes on Sunday morning. And we walk in, how you doing? Good. I'm good. Everything in life is good. I'm good. And down deep inside, no, you're not. Maybe you're hurting. Maybe you feel weak. But you're like, I have no problems. I don't need any help. Well, yeah, sometimes we do. All right. Small confession for you. All right. When I go to the Berlin Resort to work out at the gym sometimes, I know you can tell, right? I use those machines they have there, the weight machines, Nautilus equipment. Some people call them whatever you want to call them. And it's those machines where you sit down. I don't have anything to sit on, but you sit down and, on your right there's this stack of weights. It goes from like 10 pounds to 250. I don't know. I never look at that bottom one because I'm not going there. Whatever. And so you take the pin and you put it in. You're familiar with this, right? Take the pin and put it in. Well, okay, when I do shoulder press, I'm terrible at a shoulder press. I don't like shoulder presses. They hurt. So, I'll put the pin in like 50 pounds. So I do my 50-pound shoulder presses, and it hurts. But I can't believe I'm admitting this. When I get done, I sometimes like nonchalantly reach down and pull the pin out. Put it down in like 100 pounds, And so the guy walks up behind me, looks and goes, that dude's got some shoulders right there. We put on this fake perception that we're strong. This false perception, I'm strong, when we're not strong. We're not. You want to make people think that you have all your stuff together, that we have our stuff, that we can handle anything that comes our way. We don't need any help. But when we admit our weaknesses, that's when we put ourselves in the perfect place to receive God's strength. Paul, writing to the church in Corinth in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 27, look what he writes there. He says, but God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. He chose the weak things. Again, listen. He chose the weak things to shame the strong. When we acknowledge our weakness, that puts us in a perfect place to receive God's strength. If you look at Scripture, you see this over and over again, example after example of how God chose the weak. Just listen, this is just a partial list right here. Here you go. Abraham was old, Leah was unattractive, Moses stuttered, Elijah was depressed, Jeremiah was stressed, Jonah was cowardly, John the Baptist was eccentric, to say the least. All right, Peter could be pretty impulsive, Martha worried a lot, Zacchaeus was dishonest and unpopular with the people, Thomas had doubts, Paul was in poor health, Timothy was timid, and that's just a partial list of the people that Jesus chose, the people that God chose, these misfits, that God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. His strength comes to us when we humbly acknowledge our weaknesses and we recognize His strength. Now, here's the thing. I'm not asking you to become weak because you're already weak. That's not what I'm saying. I'm already weak. We're just a branch. We're just a branch. All right, I'm not saying make yourself weak because we're already weak. We acknowledge our weaknesses. We're honest about it. We humble ourselves before God, and He infuses His strength into us. So this relationship with the vine and the branch is just so important. Until you get that right, you will not have the strength. He is the vine. That's where the power comes from. We are the branch. In London, outside of Hampton Court, there's this grapevine that's over like 1,000 years old. And some of its branches are really, really long, like 200 feet long. Now, the vine itself, you can see a picture of the vine. The vine only comes up, that main part of the vine right there, probably only comes up to waist high, maybe a little higher. But some of the branches are 200 feet long. You look at the next picture. This is it. That's that one thing. I mean, it's massive. And all those branches are connected to that vine. And when they're connected to that vine, they produce fruit. As a matter of fact, this particular vine produces several tons of fruit every year. But life is in the vine. Jesus says, I am the vine, that life comes from me. Acknowledge your complete dependence on me. That's hard for us to do. You also notice in verse 1 there, Jesus says this. He says, I am the true vine. I am the true vine. Now, pay attention to that word true, all right? Because that indicates that there are other vines that aren't true. They look like they're life-giving. They look like, they'll give us strength. They look like they'll empower us, but in the end, they don't. And I think we get into a lot of trouble when we say, we are the vine. We are the vine, but that's what our culture tells us. That's what our culture wants us to believe, that we are the vine. Our culture says if you just dig down deep enough, you dig down way down deep, then you will have enough strength to get you through. You can do it on your own. You are the vine. You are the strength. I mean, that's pretty much the message of every talk show. That's pretty much the message of every self-help, 2,000 self-help books that are written every year. You are the vine. You're not a branch. You're the vine. Find strength from within. But it doesn't work. Exodus chapter 3. You may be familiar with the story in Exodus chapter 3. Moses, at this point in his life, he's on the backside being a shepherd. He's working for his father-in-law. He's a shepherd. He's been a shepherd for 40 years out there just tending those sheep. When he comes up on a burning bush one day. You know the story, and he takes off his sandals and he walks up to the bush, and God speaks to him through the burning bush. And he says to Moses, Moses, you shoeless shepherd, I want you to go to the most powerful man in the world, Pharaoh, and I want you to get the Israelites freed from slavery. These millions of Israelites. Well, that must have seemed pretty humorous to Moses. He knows he can't do that. He's a shepherd on the backside. This is what I've been doing for years. I work for my father-in-law. So he says to God in Exodus 3:11, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring out the Israelites? Who am I that I should do this? I don't have the strength. Now here's the thing. God doesn't say, oh, yeah, Moses, yes you do. Just dig down deep inside. He doesn't say, Moses, you're gifted enough. Moses, you're talented enough. Moses, you got what it takes. No, he doesn't say any of that. Here's what God tells him in verse 12. He says, I will be with you. I will be with you. You see, the call was not for Moses to find his strength from within. The call was for him to find his strength from above. Just be the branch, Moses. Just be the branch. Stay connected to the vine. That's where the strength comes from. I love the way the Amplified Version puts Philippians 4:13 that Jeremy talked about earlier. It says, I have strength for all things in Christ who empowers me. I am ready for anything and equal to anything through him who infuses his inner strength into me. I am self-sufficient in Christ's sufficiency. Now listen to what Jesus says as we continue on in John 15, verse 2. He, God the gardener, cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit. While every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so that it will be more fruitful. Now, there was a couple years ago where I had to read this again. I was like, wait a minute. Did that just say what I think it says? That God prunes the branches that are fruitful. Because you would think it would say the branches that are unfruitful, that God prunes those. But no, he says the branches that are fruitful, that God prunes. Well, pruning's painful, right? It hurts. Pruning is not an easy process. Some of you have gardens, or maybe you have fruit trees, or maybe you have grapevines, and you know when you prune them, they look awful. I mean, it looks like you've devastated the thing, you know. But in reality, you know it's going to come back stronger, and it's going to produce more fruit in the future because it's been pruned. So here's the second thing we need to know to grow in our strength. Accept God's pruning in your life. Accept God's pruning. Now, this isn't easy because it hurts to be pruned. So maybe God is allowing you to go through some financial challenges because he wants you to be more dependent upon him and not money. Or maybe God's allowing you to go through some physical or some health challenges because he wants you to find your strength from him to be able to get through. He wants you to know how weak that you are so that you can look to him more perfectly. Or maybe he's allowing you to go through some difficult relationship because he wants you to bear fruit that represents him, and the grace, the peace, the patience. So these difficult challenges are in reality sometimes an act of love by God. As he prunes, we get stronger. We will bear more fruit. Hebrews 12:11, listen to these scriptures. No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. James 1:2-4. Consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance. Perseverance must finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. And the only way that we're really going to have the strength that God wants us to have is to bear the fruit that he wants us to bear, is to go through the pruning process. And sometimes that's not easy. But I'll say it again. I've said it a lot lately. No one said the Christian life is easy. No one said following Jesus was going to be easy. And if anyone ever told you that, if anyone ever tells you that in the future, hey, following Jesus is going to be easy, they are a liar. It's not easy. We accept God's pruning. Step number 3, remain. Remain. Finding strength in God means you remain. Starting in verse 4. Jesus says, remain in me and I will remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine, you are the branch. If a man remains in me and I in him, he will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If anyone does not remain in me, he is like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into a fire, and burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be given to you. This is to my Father's glory that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Now remain in my love. If you obey my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have obeyed my Father's commands and remain in his love. So, did you pick up the key word in there? Now, that's the NIV. Some other translations say abide. Abide. 11 times in 11 verses, the word remain is used. It's the entire message in one word. Remain. I mean, if you could really take everything that Jesus wants to say right here before his death, it's this one word, remain. Now, if you're like me, you don't get real excited about that. It's a verb, but it's not really like this great action verb. Remain. It's kind of like sit still. I mean, we want something bold, right? You know, like suck it up, go get them, you know, do something, you know. I mean, no, just remain. And we tend to think that we have to do something in order to receive God's strength and blessing in our lives, that it's based on productions, it's based on how much fruit we produce. And Jesus says, no, first it's the connection, then you remain. The branch remains in the vine. This goes against everything that we've ever heard, because everything we've ever been told is it's based on production. If you produce enough at work, you will get the promotion. If you score enough points, you will get to start on the team. You don't have to sit the bench. If you score high enough on the test, you will get the scholarship. Everything we know is based on production. So here's what we tend to think. We think production comes before connection. That if I produce for God, then he's going to accept me on the vine, and then I will receive God's strength. We have this mentality that if we want to receive God's strength, to have his power in our life, then we've got to produce, we've got to produce, we've got to produce. And if I'm not producing, then, well, we get cut. And this is so vitally important to understand. Jesus is not attached to us. We're attached to him. It's about the connection. You see, God's not looking for more from us. He's looking for more of us. And when he gets more of you, you connect to him and he gets more of you, then guess what happens? He begins to get more from you. Connection, then production. So here's what I want us to do. I want us to think about the point where the vine connects to the branch. That's where all the life-giving nutrients come from. That's where all the power and strength comes from. And what determines how much power and strength comes from that vine into the branch is the circumference of the branch. So as we're connected to the vine, as we, continue to grow in our faith and obedience to Christ, as we continue to come together on Sunday morning and worship together as a family, as we get into small groups and we study together, as we, meditate on scriptures, as we study scriptures, as we take our quiet time each day, guess what happens? That circumference begins to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until we start to get more and more strength and life-giving nutrients coming from the vine. Connection, then production. It's all about the connection. So here's the message. He doesn't have much time left. He says, connect, remain, stay connected. In just a few minutes, I'm going to be arrested. Remain. They're going to put me on trial. They are going to beat me. Remain. They're going to crucify me. I'm going to die. Remain. They're going to come after you. Remain. When I ascend into heaven, remain. When you face persecution for being a follower of Jesus, remain. When your retirement portfolio takes a major downfall, remain. When your car breaks down and nothing seems to be going right in life, remain. When your spouse disappoints you, when your child breaks your heart, when you lose your job, when people make fun of you because you attend church or because of what you believe, remain. Remain. Stay connected. Just be the branch. Be the branch. I was trying to think of a picture that captures this, an example, and I'm reminded of a story that, it's an older story, several years old, but it's a story of a father and a son, and they compete. They compete in triathlons. They compete in marathons. They do Ironman together. Ironman, where you swim, you bike, you run, all right? And the thing is that Ricky, the son, he has cerebral palsy. He's powerless on his own. The father, Dick, really has to do all the work. But I want you to think about the son's role as they compete. As they're doing a triathlon, I want you to think about, what is the son's role? They put him in a boat. He attaches by a rope to his father, and his father swims 2 miles, pulling that boat behind him. He picks him up out of the boat. He puts him in a special seat on his bike, and then he pedals his son 112 miles. He then puts him in a special cart, and he pushes him 26.2-mile marathon. Well, what's his role? His role is to connect, to remain. The father is doing the work, but a son must remain. He sticks with it. It's hot sometimes. It's cold sometimes. It's rainy sometimes. He sticks with it. He stays with the father. Now, any success is going to come from the father's strength, but the son has to connect. To connect. I want you to watch the video.